on my mind.
Somebody in a parachute has just landed on the edge of the ring. Holyfield bit by a dirty Mike Tyson.
Hello and welcome to episode 30 of The Boxing Show with me, your host, Rob Tebbutt. As always, I'd like to remind everybody to please like, comment and subscribe. Turn your notifications on for more boxing content. Now that's out of the way, joined by the one and only Mr. Andy Clarke today. It is a twosome. We don't have Barry Jones, certainly not for the morning.
Week.
No thruple. God, it was just three's a crowd, so we got rid of Barry. And it's just myself and the one and only Mr. Andy Clarke. We're going to have a look at last weekend, as well as looking ahead to this weekend. Joe Joyce and Zhilei Zhang locking horns again. But before we discuss that, how are you, Andy?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Very well, thanks. Had yet another hospital visit this morning because I'm just a few weeks away from a new arrival, our first ever, me and my wife. So that's very, very exciting. A 2.5 hour antenatal class yesterday. Don't know if anybody has gone down that route. Loads of people will have done, but yeah, that was longer than I thought.
Yeah, I've done that. I was rubbish at all of it, but yeah, it's one of those things you just learn as you go. So it's one of those things.
That's what I'm thinking.
So everyone always says, don't they? Oh, don't worry about that. You'll be all right when the baby comes. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. But you're going to join the club. The working full time in boxing and managing a family life at home. So good luck, mate. Because
yeah, I know I've avoided it until now. I know there are obstacles ahead, but yeah, it's going to be great. Like any time from the start of October is when it's going to happen. So I'm not really paying any attention to due dates because I discovered that only 5% of kids get born on their due date. So I'm just going to kind of wait and see and, you know, dash to the hospital and try and remain calm.
Well,
I'm looking at it in you know, I have to look at things in boxing terms clearly because that's the only way to make any sense of anything. But I feel like it's a 12-rounder for my wife, not for me. And I'm kind of in the role of trainer, motivator, towel, spit bucket, a few snacks, you know, that kind of thing. Try and say the right thing just to keep her in there.
Yeah. Don't want to overload them with information.
Absolutely
Yeah.
not. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
All of that good stuff. I'm sure she'll appreciate that.
Well, if she could avoid going into labour between 11 and 1 on a Monday, we'd really appreciate it here on the Boxing Show. But no, congratulations on the pending new arrival. Right now, we've got all the antenatal talk out of the way for the Boxing Show. Pity Barry wasn't here for that. I'm sure he'd have some very interesting insights. Yeah, did you have a good weekend? Busy?
Yeah, I was in Telford for the box off, which I've been looking forward to because I always really like the concept. If people don't know what it is, what it was at the weekend, basically it's a team tournament. So we had 4 cities, London, Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds. And the idea is you give opportunities to fighters who don't normally get them. So Daryl Sharp was on the card, for example, who's a really good fighter, former area champion, but he's in the away corner almost all the time. Daryl Tapfuma, who I've seen a couple of times, again, away corner fighter. A mixture of people who pretty much exclusively box in the away corner, some who box a bit in each, and others who have started life as a prospect but are early on and are happy to take a really competitive fight early. So it made for some great matches. They matched it really, really well, and every fight was good. We had some brutal stoppages, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I really hope it works because they deserve it to work. I think the team thing will be something that broadcasters could find interesting. It gives it that bit of identity. Johnny was there, Johnny Nelson representing Leeds, Ricky Hatton for Manchester, Tom Skinner for London. Got to know him a little bit. He's a good guy. JK for Birmingham, same thing. So, yeah, the finals are coming towards the end of November, and it's got possibilities. It's got real possibilities. The only thing I think that say Sky or TNT or DAZN would have to get over is some of the records that some of these fighters will have, because they might think, oh, put that up on screen, you know, how do we explain that? Well, you just do have to explain it. And I think that might be where the team dynamic will come in more. You know, this isn't just about individuals. This is about just making good fights and do something a bit different.
Yeah, it almost has that kind of game show feel about it, sort of thing that you know the family could watch together like that. That's the sort of thing.
Yeah, they're definitely going. That's definitely what they're going for. I think they'd be open to kind of like Sundays and Sunday afternoons and stuff like that, and making a bit of an occasion of it. So we'll see what happens with it. But it was a good start.
Well, we'll look to see what happens with that down the line. Shout out to Razzie and all of the guys on the box off. Let's start on Friday before we look ahead to this weekend. Zhilei Zhang versus Joe Joyce 2. We saw the return of the IBF featherweight champion of the world, Luis Alberto Lopez, against Joe Gonzalez. Bit of a nearly man, Joe Gonzalez, certainly down at featherweight. Very much a nearly man, as he proved to be again on Friday. Competitive fight, but a fight that I felt, at least anyway, was pretty clearly won by Luis Alberto Lopez, albeit not in the spectacular fashion that we saw him deal with Michael Conlan.
No, but yeah, I agree. I thought he won pretty clearly, and I think the dividing line between the two of them really was that when you look at what lands, it's not just a punch lands and that's a scoring punch. How heavy is it? And everything that Lopez landed was way heavier than anything that Gonzalez landed. I mean, it's not like he didn't have success because he did, but just the weight of shot. If you weighed up the tonnage, if you like, landed by each one, then I think. And I know that's not how you score boxing. I'm aware of that, but it would have been significantly in his favour, and that's why, if you've got a close-ish round in terms of what's landed, clean or clean-ish, then it's that whole energy bar thing, isn't it? What you land would obviously, with your hands of stone, be very heavy, and 10 of your shots would take almost my entire energy bar away, whereas feather-fisted Clarke, I land 10 shots on Tebbutt and it's not going to do a lot to you. So I think that was, for me, why he won clearly. And I just really like watching Lopez because he is kind of unusual. He does seem to do quite a lot wrong in how upright he is, and he does pull out quite high, and when he throws one hand, the other one just kind of does its own thing, doesn't it? But he can obviously take a shot and he can land one. When you watch him, he's one of those people where I just sort of wince every time he throws a punch and it lands, because it just seems like it's heavy. And because he's quite big, those 8 ounces, they look tiny on him. It's funny, these little things you take away from watching some people sometimes. But it was, I enjoyed it. I liked the setup, the arena. It was Mexican Independence Weekend, wasn't it, I think, as well. So, I mean, Rebasi Ramirez has been clamouring for a unification. They're both with Top Rank, and you'd imagine that's probably what'll happen. And, I'm here for that every day of the week.
Yeah, great fight that would potentially be. Rebasi Ramirez, we're big fans of Rebasi Ramirez here on the Boxing Show, as we've mentioned in the past. I think it was mentioned in the commentary. We had Jamel Herring and Christina Poncha on the commentary on Friday night. I have to keep double checking because there was a Saturday show as well. And I think Jamel Herring referred to similarities between Luis Alberto Lopez and Emmanuel Navarrete, which I thought was quite astute. I felt like very, very similar sorts of styles. They throw punches from awkward angles. They look like they're out of range when they're not. They take like an extra step, and all of a sudden they're on. They're
off balance when they're not. Or Lopez looks like he's kind of, it just you watch them and you just think, they're definitely those kinds of fighters whereby when you analyse them in the gym or your trainer's doing their thing, watching tape, they might feel like there's quite a lot to be exploited there. But then when you get in there, you realise that actually, like in theory and on paper, that could be true, but in practice, it's an altogether different thing. So I see what he's saying there. Yeah, I see what he's saying. I kind of feel like they are quite sort of different, but the same in their irregularities. Yeah, in their kind of unorthodoxy, if you like. There is. Yeah, I can see what he means by that.
You mentioned there about kind of having a look and seeing, because I think everybody could kind of look at Lopez and thinks, okay, well, he throws off the wrong foot and then he's wide here, just take a half step back and come through the middle. Kind of what we all, I think, well, certainly I did, expect to see from Michael Conlan, that we'd see Conlan with that superior boxing skill just to be able to offset him and keep turning him and make him look silly and ultimately chip away at him. But it is, I think, a lot different when he gets in there and when he starts landing with those little 8-ounce gloves, and he's a man in form as well. You think from the Vences fight onwards, it's difficult to see a fighter who has really been in such good form, going in there as the away fighter, going in there. He very much was against Josh Warrington the night he won the title, was against Michael Conlan. Okay, he was defending his title, but he had to go to Belfast to do it in a fight where, again, people were picking Conlan because of the technical skill. And those kind of little added bonuses, beating good fighters as well. I think, obviously, Joe Gonzalez is a very solid fighter. Josh Warrington, 2-time world champion. Conlan, we all know how good he is technically. It's difficult to think of anybody else who's got that sort of ledger over the last couple of years. He's kind of come from nowhere, really, Luis Alberto Lopez. He lost to Ruben Villa, who was on the card at the weekend. Good fighter, but Ruben Villa has kind of, has not really gone anywhere since then. Kind of shows how sort of arse backwards boxing can be when you sense that Ruben Villa beat him, and now Luis Alberto Lopez is looking at the big paydays and the big unification fights down at featherweight. But I thought he was good. I didn't think it wasn't. I put up a tweet saying solid but unspectacular. So it was unspectacular. Joe Gonzalez is this. Look, Joe Gonzalez is a good fighter. Had that fight last time out, or one of his last fights against Isaac Dogbe, which was a close fight. And we know Dogbe's a good fighter, but a super bantamweight really. I think in order for us to get super excited about Luis Alberto Lopez, it would have been nice to see him go through the gears.
My expectation was that he would win that fight.
Yeah.
And so when he did win it, I was
it's
the same
just kind
as you.
of how
I just
he
thought
did
he
it.
took care of it, and he wasn't supersonic, but he won comfortably. Another thing about him, I think, that might be a bit disconcerting if you're in there with him, is that he does kind of, he's not in a rush, is he? He's really quite deliberate.
I think that's
you
what
feel like you should be able to see it all coming, because it's not like quick, snappy. It's kind of like quite sort of measured. Right, I'm going to throw a right hand now. So,
and then he goes for a walk, doesn't he?
Yeah, and then he goes for a little walk. You feel like there's things you could do to stop him, but you're right about the story. I think he's a brilliant success story from recent times, because he was in that fight with Vences, which was a bit of a classic top-rank manoeuvre that we often talk about, where Lopez wasn't their guy, but Vences was, and he'd had an unexpected defeat in a fight that they thought he would win, and so he was thrown into that test. Lopez was the guy. He won. They put him in again, didn't they, against Gabe Flores? We've talked about that fight before.
Yeah.
And then Isaac Lowe was the first time we saw him over here, and then Warrington, and then Conlan. And maybe he's one of these people who just manages to get you to fight the wrong fight, because Michael did that, and I didn't think he would. That was kind of the last thing that I would imagine that he would end up doing, which was get drawn into something he shouldn't get drawn into. But yeah, it's strange the kind of Jedi powers that some fighters can have over their opponents when the bell goes, because like we said, you look at him and you would feel like, yeah, we can get this done, and then the bell goes and it's different.
Does it put Josh Warrington's loss to him in a bit more perspective now? Of course, that was kind of back end of last year in December. Close fight, 7-5 on, I think it was a majority decision. Very close fight across the board. I think the general feeling was that Lopez won it and won it by a couple of rounds. But then when you see Lopez go and destroy Michael Conlan, beat Joe Gonzalez, who's a very capable world-level operator, I think people were kind of writing Josh Warrington's obituary, really, after that fight, after losing his title to Luis Alberto Lopez. Does it give it a little bit of perspective going into that Lee Wood fight, especially?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that's a good point, because I mean, just COVID was an absolute disaster for Josh, wasn't it? It wasn't great for anybody, but for him particularly, it really was, because he changed promoter. He was looking at unifications. He had this odd situation regarding the IBF, wasn't it? And fights that he thought were going to get made and then didn't get made, and he ended up giving up the belt and all that kind of thing. And then he had that just horrific night against Lara, and that was the first time we'd really seen him. And I think people kind of decided off the back of that maybe he was done, because he'd had quite a long career, and that possibly he was going down the other side of the hill. The rematch was really frustrating. We couldn't really tell too much from that. But that performance against Lopez does look better with not that much time having been put between it and now. So I'm really looking forward to that fight against Lee Wood. I know we'll get to it in the coming weeks, but I just think that's a tremendous, tremendous fight. And Wood will rightly be favourite, you'd imagine, on recent form. But I do feel like there's some big performances left in Warrington yet.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant fight. It's a proper domestic dust-up, and we like a proper domestic dust-up here on the Boxing Show, as everybody knows. Just running through featherweight at the minute, you mentioned Lee Wood. There's Ray Vargas as well. We expect to come down to featherweight again after his fight with O'Shaquie Foster. Obviously went up to super featherweight and was unsuccessful. Then you've got Luis Alberto Lopez with the IBF, and then Robeisy Ramirez, who we've mentioned as the WBO. Where do you feel the land lies at the minute at featherweight? Who's your number one? Does the winner of Wood Warrington become number one? Would the winner of Luis Alberto Lopez versus Robeisy Ramirez? How do you see the land as it lies at the minute at 126?
It's a good question, that. I think it's got to be either... It's the winner of Wood Warrington. So at the minute the champion is Wood. So it's either him or Lopez, I think, when you look at resumes. I know Vargas has won a world title in a different way, but I would say it's one of those two. And it's quite difficult to call, I think, because those wins for Lopez are big wins, and both away from home as well. So that really is impressive. But then what Wood managed to do against Lara can do as well, but particularly Lara, to go straight back in and win. Again, I didn't expect him to be able to do that, if I'm brutally honest. So I find those two difficult to split.
So for me at the minute, I'd probably go
with Lopez at the moment, just because that train is, as you say, is running hot.
Yeah, I would go Lopez is the number one at the minute. Then I expect the winner of Wood Warrington to go number one, but I think Robeisy Ramirez beats all of them.
Yeah, maybe, but at the moment...
Yeah, it's kind of... We get into that all the time. We speak about it quite often, don't we? It's kind of how
Depends how you do your rankings. If you're going to look more at potential, if you're going to look at who you think would win if they all boxed each other, that's one way of doing it.
Yeah.
I do it just on purely their results so far. Lopez Ramirez is just an absolutely sensational fight because just for all sorts of reasons, every single reason I can think of. It's people will sell it. It's got a great narrative to be able to sell as well, but people will sell it as the kind of rough, tough, spit and sawdust Mexican fighter against the... You can't call him Silver Spoon because he's had to leave Cuba and go through all of that. But people like the kind of big amateur background against someone who's turned pro young. They like that, don't they? And they like to position it as kind of like done it the hard way, Silver Spoon. That's what people like to do with it. And I think that's what they will try and do to an extent, because he was signed by Top Rank from the start and all the rest of it, 2 Olympic golds. And we all kind of know the background for this one. But it's just a tremendous fight.
It's a brilliant fight. And I think like one of the other kind of, I guess, easy... What word am I looking for here? Sort of easy way to brand it really is the Mexican warrior against the slick, skilled Cuban. But Robeisy Ramirez is not just a slick, skilled Cuban.
No, he'll stand and have it with you. I mean, he that's one of the things I like about him most. Whether that would turn out to be a mistake against Lopez, that's the thing. Through 12 rounds, if it's a close fight, which we don't know, but you would imagine the signs are that it would be. At times, you are going to have to go there and do that, unless he just produces this supersonic boxing masterclass and is able to hit him hard enough whilst doing that to just keep him completely under control. I don't see that happening. So you're going to have to go there in spells. You'll have no choice. But I wouldn't suggest that was his plan A. You wouldn't have thought it would be.
No.
But strange things can happen on the night when you get in there. Like I said with Conlon, I didn't feel like that would play out the way that it did. But when someone ends up doing that, you've always got to give credit to the person who wins and think, okay, well, they made that happen rather than the other person just made the wrong choice. It's easy, isn't it? Particularly when it's one of our own, if you like, to think about what they didn't do rather than what the other guy did do. And yeah, like I say, I think Lopez is one of these guys who maybe he's got that ability to, however he does it, just to get people to cooperate, basically.
It's one of the things and one of the reasons why I like the Navarrete comparisons is that he covers ground so quickly because he kind of leads off with a shot that's not really supposed to hit you. It's just to occupy you so he can then try and throw another shot from up here or down there or
and
around
that hand's
there.
coming from, that's what I find really interesting about watching him. There's quite a lot going on there where it'd be quite easy to get distracted by it, I think, even though he never really seems to move that quick. Stylistically it's a great matchup, isn't it, as well, the pair of them.
Who do you lean towards in that?
I genuinely don't know. I feel like Ramirez is that good that he'll be able to find a way, that he maybe will be able to exploit a few things that other people haven't been able to. If he didn't have the ability that I've not seen against someone like Lopez, but that I have seen to hold his feet and crack and do that, then I'd be less confident. But the will is there to do that. So I would shade him, but it is a shade.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think that gun to my head, I would probably go for Robesi Ramirez, but I think it's a really hard fight at this stage of his career. If you're in the Ramirez business, you probably want one or two more, I think. I mean, he's not going to want one or two more because he's ready to go. But if you were kind of from a removed place, probably want one more against somebody.
Bigger unification is obviously a big seller. I don't know necessarily whether you get paid all that much for it. Brilliant fight though it is in comparison to other stuff we see. It's really, really top level, but it's quite trade, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be honest. So yeah, I mean these are things you have to try and weigh up, but it's going to happen, isn't it? Because they're both with Top Rank, so it is going to happen. I mean, it's not impossible that they would let them have one more each, but then the danger is that one of them loses. But then again, as we say, it's not such a massive marquee thing that would be an absolute disaster were that to happen.
No.
But we talked about it a few weeks ago, I think, didn't we? How much a win can take away from people sometimes. And we always think about defeats, but a really hard win can really drain your tank, can't it, in terms of your career? And it could be that kind of night. I mean, it's hard to see it not being that kind of night, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think that's a fight where anyone will come out unscathed. I think it's one of those where somebody's going to leave an imprint on you, one way or the other, for sure. Okay, let's move on to Saturday night and discuss the return to the ring for William Zepeda. A very impressive return to the ring for William Zepeda. Billy Zepeda, as I prefer to call him now, because I think he's cool, like Billy Z. Anyway, he returned with a brilliant win. In a fight where I think everybody had expected him to look good against Mercito Gesta, but Gesta, of course, riding a little mini wave of his own, had a couple of good performances against Joel Diaz Jr. and then against Diego De La Hoya. No, he had sorry, it's been a long weekend. Jojo Diaz.
Yeah, Jojo Diaz.
Jojo Diaz.
He's the common denominator recently.
Yeah, Jojo Diaz. Yeah. But a really good performance, I thought, from William Zepeda. I think he threw 615 punches in less than 6 rounds. Yeah,
and that, they were reeling out those stats regularly, and I'm not a massive, I can take or leave punch stats, but that's where they do have some relevance, where you see somebody's engine and work rate, and you're watching it in real time. It is quite interesting, I think, to kind of bring them up in those scenarios, because it's not like he's tip-tapping with everything. He's getting to work, isn't he? And he does look good. I think that was a really good fight for him against a tough guy, stopped on his feet. I guess the difficulty is, I mean, when you look at that division and you look at where you would kind of rank who, and he's undefeated, but it's still kind of, I mean, obviously you've got Haney, but he's fighting Prograis. What will happen with those belts? We don't really know. Lomachenko, you'd imagine, will keep going. Shakur, Gervonta Davis, Kambosos, you would have to have ahead of him rankings-wise because of what he's done. But then maybe he's the next guy after that.
Yeah, I think he's really laid down a marker, not just with the win over Gesta, because, I mean, I think it's fair to say everybody expected him to look good against Gesta, but that type of style, high volume, and the
Yeah.
shots that he's thrown, they're not pitter-patter shots.
No, they're not.
He's
They're
not.
heavy.
Yeah, he's not one of these guys who is just trying to. Okay, yeah, he's going to grind you down, but he's trying to knock you out with pretty much every shot as well.
Lead right uppercut, left hand. He loves that, doesn't he?
Yeah, and it's just the right hook as well did a lot of damage at the weekend. Hester, I think, as soon as really the second or third round, looked like he kind of didn't really fancy much more, and who could blame him considering everything that was coming back at him. But it was the type of performance that you really need to see from somebody who is a top 5 lightweight, depending on who you talk to. You need to go in there and handle business against somebody of Masito Hester's vintage, should we say. And he did that. And I think that's all you can really expect
like he's got
from
a
him.
decent following as well, because that place, I love those kinds of venues where it's probably not the greatest place to watch from, but there's no real tearing. It's just a big hall, basically, isn't it? And the roof's quite low, and it's probably boiling hot and sweaty, and it looked quite atmospheric. I kind of, it's a bit of a throwback, those places. So I like that whole thing. I like the look of it, and yeah, he's really gathering momentum. It's just kind of, what do you do with him now? I don't really know what his rankings are, but if you're above him in the rankings, there's no possible reason why you would want to fight him, is there? Really, there's nothing in it for you.
No, I mean, at the minute, lightweight is kind of, it is the division that has threatened a lot over the last few years and delivered very little. I mean, people talk about the heavyweight division, and rightfully so, not delivering the big fights. I mean, short of kind of Kambosos, who we've mentioned, Haney then went over to box Kambosos in Australia, while there was a lot of accolades on the line there, and certainly was decent money, but by all accounts, it wasn't one of the 4 kings or princes or whatever we've called them, 2 of those guys squaring off, which I think until that really happens, I know we had it with Davis and Garcia. Well, technically it was a 1-3-6, so we'll leave that.
Haney Lomachenko.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm doing it a disservice, but
it's not. But you're right.
I mean, we had as recently as last week, didn't we?
When Lopez beat Lomachenko, that's when everybody started talking about it, wasn't it? And the protagonists who were around at that time, basically nothing has happened.
And at lightweight at the minute, we've just seen recently, we saw Shakur Stevenson was announced he was going to box Frank Martin, which would have been, I remember at the time, I think I spoke to you about it, I spoke to somebody about it and said, he's not Ben Davison, it wasn't you. And he said, that fight's been announced. I said, I'm really surprised by that. I was like, you got a top-ranked guy and a PBC guy. Like, there's lots of guys for Frank Martin to fight from PBC. And then we found out that the fight wasn't going to happen. So, I mean, Shakur Stevenson...
What was the reason? Was it money?
It's always money, isn't it? So it's always...
Frank Martin felt like he wasn't getting enough, I think. That's what I heard.
Yeah, it was always money. He felt like he wasn't getting enough money. This is my own kind of personal opinion. When you see top-ranked fighter, PBC fighter ordered to box each other by a governing body, it kind of shows where the governing bodies are when it comes to actual sway and influence and making fights happen. We had it last year in November with Shakur Stevenson and Pitbull Cruz as well. Lightweight, who was ordered to box in a final eliminator for the WBC lightweight title. That didn't happen.
I feel like what we need to see, to not to save the division, but Shakur Stevenson against Devontae Davis would be absolutely mega. And I just kind of feel like that could happen.
Yeah, I mean
there's difficulties, the usual ones, but I just kind of feel like that could happen.
Just going back onto what we were talking about with Zepeda. So Zepeda, well ranked with all the governing bodies. So he's number 7 with the WBO. He's number 6 with the IBF. Number 5 with the WBC. And number 2 with the WBA. Isaac Cruz above him with the WBA and with the WBC and with the IBF and with the WBO. That's a fight I'd like. Great stylistic matchup as well.
Yeah.
We could see Denis Berinchik, WBO. He's ranked at number 4. I think he's got a WBO International or some sort of title there.
Yeah, he's had that for
a little while.
For ages. Where's he at 2? Is he?
He's at number 4 with the WBO.
So he's dropped down a little bit.
WBO, you've got Haney 1. These, of course, not the up-to-date ones. I think they're due actually. The WBO ones, I think, should be due any time now. These are as of the 19th of August. You've got Stevenson 1. Behind, obviously, Haney, the champion. Lomachenko 2, Cruz 3, Berinchik 4, Angel Fierro, who we saw this past weekend as well in Mexico.
Berinchik's a decent shout, because he's I've followed him for since he was on that Ukrainian team back in London, just to see how all those careers would go, because it's quite interesting. Obviously,
Yeah.
Usyk, Lomachenko, Gvozdyk, Shalestiuk's not really done anything, to be honest, but in terms of making much of an impact, and him, and he's had a slow burner too. You know, he's a big star in Ukraine. He was on Dancing with the Stars and stuff like that. You know, he's a big deal, but he's been inactive. But then we saw him the other week against Yigit, and he won that fight, and that was a decent performance. And we saw him over in the UK previously against Ivan Mendy, and he won that fight, and it was a decent performance. But now is kind of shit or get off the pot time, really, because are you gonna what are we doing here almost? Because he's had that WBO international for a really long time, and if he's going to make the impact that he wants to and try and fight for a world title, and who knows what will happen with all of those belts. I do feel like the sanctioning bodies need to get a bit of a grip when it comes to somebody holding titles up, and if Haney's going to, he's not the only one. Charlo, he's unified those titles. He's going to go and fight Canelo, so everybody's just waiting since he last boxed, which was last May. You know, so it'll be 2 years if he then came back down and defended, which we don't think he will. Katie Taylor's holding up all those lightweight belts, boxing Chantal Cameron, and I think they need to. This is a situation that they can easily address, because you just say to the person, well, you're the number one. Clearly, if you're going to come back down here and box again, then, you know, you'll be more than happy, more than welcome to fight for your old belt. But no one seems to be really doing that. But Barinchyk, is he hanging on to see if those belts fragment, and then maybe he could fight for one of them?
I think that's more than likely the case.
Yeah, I'd say he probably is. I mean, you know, imagine him against Lomachenko, which couldn't happen in Ukraine at the minute, obviously.
No.
We all know that. But, yeah, he needs to... Yeah, it's as simple as that. It's like, what are we actually doing here?
Alex Krasiuk told me that would be a great fight. That they'd both like that fight, Barinchyk and Lomachenko.
I bet. You know, they make a ton of money out of it, hopefully.
But apparently there's a bit of spice there as well, which we love. We love a bit of spice here on the boxing show.
Well, we all just assume that everybody gets on,
exactly,
don't we?
And it's not the case, particularly in
those
boxing.
are two big personalities.
Barinchyik's a lunatic.
Yeah, no, Barinchyk, yeah, and he's entertaining. He loves a ring walk.
Yeah, his ring walk.
And I say he's a big star in Ukraine. He really is.
Just on William Zepeda, how's this for you? Okay, William Zepeda versus Maxi Hughes. Well,
Maxi's a name that you would always throw in there, isn't he? Because he would do it. He would take it. 100% he would. And he's got absolutely no chance of getting a rematch with Kambosos.
No, definitely not.
That's never going to happen. Yeah, why not? Why not? You know, there's a willing opponent for Zepeda, and not someone who he could overlook or take lightly, and not someone who you could put up there and just say, "Wow, as our friends in America like to do, what's the point of him fighting this guy?" You know, it's because he's got credentials now. Because he not everybody agrees that he should have got the decision against Kambosos, but I think anyone with any sense would agree that he could have. So he's got, he qualifies, doesn't he?
Gives that perfect barometer. Okay, he didn't get the win against Kambosos. But a lot of people, I had him winning the fight. I thought it was a close fight, but a close fight with a clear winner, you can have both the same. And then for Zepeda, it's okay, well, look at what Kambosos did. He struggled with him. Look what I would do. I'd make Zepeda a good favourite in that fight against Maxi Hughes. I think Zepeda
it's a good yardstick, isn't it? It's a good barometer. And you've got someone there, luckily for you, who would do it. I mean, if the money's right, I'm sure he would do it, Maxi. Why wouldn't he? Yeah,
and I think Zepeda is a much better fighter than Kambosos with respect to Kambosos, and they would fancy their chances of making a good statement in that fight as well. Maxi Hughes has boxed on his own in the past. That's a fight that I would quite like to see between William.
What do you think the chances are of Stevenson? Javante Davis?
Not high. Not high.
It's a shame, isn't
it? It doesn't. I am caught up with Dan Canobio, who I'll save it because Barry's not here. Barry likes Dan Canobio, but anyway, I caught up with him and we spoke about it. It's, look, it doesn't make it right, and like there'll be people who are watching this going, "Oh well, you know, why can't they fight?" And it's just not like, if you bury your head in the sand and completely ignore the massive, you know, political landmine that is boxing, then you're not really doing yourself many favours. And I just can't see the fight happening. I've
spoken to a few people who've been quite optimistic about it, but they're not on the inside of it.
It's like, in order for that fight to happen, in my humble opinion, okay, these views are not shared by Boxing News. I think Shakur Stevenson, while he's a big top-ranked named fighter signed to Top Rank, is not going to get the chance to box the pay-per-view star at PBC when PBC have got Frank Martin. They've got Isaac Cruz in a rematch. Okay, whether we want to see the fight or not, Cruz has become a little cult figure on the back of that. I was out in Vegas for Spence Crawford, and he was on the undercard. There was a big, massive sea of Mexican fans who were there to queue up for pictures with Pitbull. He's a sellable commodity.
Yeah.
Chris Colbert, okay, not the most competitive fight I wouldn't necessarily have thought. That's another name that they could get for Davis. Davis could go to 140. Who knows? He could go to 147 or fight someone at 143 or something. You never know what he's going to do. But that is the fight for me. That, if I was going to make a fight at lightweight, that would be the one I want to see. Shakur Stevenson versus Gervonta Davis. I just can't see it generating enough money to make it viable on the PBC side, because I think PBC with Davis, and particularly on the back of that massive fight with Ryan Garcia, they have a proven pay-per-view attraction, somebody who's going to sell and make money any which way possible. We all know that Shakur Stevenson is a fantastic fighter, but is he doing multi-million-dollar gates? Is he doing hundreds of thousand pay-per-views? He's not.
No,
that's a fact.
That's true.
And in order to look, I think people, and maybe we can be guilty of it sometimes, overlook just how rare it is to have joint broadcasts and joint pay-per-views and to have networks working together. They only happen for the biggest fights, not big fights, the biggest fights. It almost didn't happen with Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia. Why did it happen? Because Ryan Garcia's got 9 million Instagram followers and is a massive commercial commodity. Shakur Stevenson, in my opinion, beats Ryan Garcia 7 days a week, twice on Sundays. Doesn't make him a bigger draw than him. Doesn't mean that he's going to bring enough money to the table in order to satisfy all parties for something like that. It's the sad, brutal realization of the boxing business. So I don't see that fight happening. Is it a fight that we could see in the future? Potentially. I think in order for it to happen while Shakur Stevenson's still at Top Rank, he's going to need to beat Devin Haney, then he's going to need to beat Lomachenko, and he's going to have to go some to get his commercial value up to a point whereby Al Heyman and PBC look at it and go, actually, yeah, he's bringing this to the table and that to the table, rather than looking at it and going, he's really good.
Yeah, that
and that doesn't mean anyone's scared. Again, we talk about this all the time. But
weirdly, if that's all you've got, it kind of counts against you.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you're a 2-weight world champion and you're this and you're that. Yeah. But like, bottom line, why are we going to risk our, he's a $100 million fighter when you factor in what he can generate? I mean, he generated it already in one fight against Ryan Garcia, Gervonta Davis. Obviously, Garcia. Do you think
there's a chance though that at some point, and maybe it'll arrive soon, where Davis might start to get a bit frustrated?
No. I think
really want to just cement his place as an absolutely, like, indisputably one of the top fighters in the world by fighting these guys.
I don't think so, and that may not be, and that's not that's not a slight against Gervonta Davis. I want to see him box.
He's just very well set up at PBC, isn't he?
There's no need from their perspective. There's no need. Like he did an interview. It's very rare that you get.
But sometimes when these things do happen unexpectedly, it is because one fighter, the star, decides this is what is going to happen. Yeah. And if it doesn't happen, I will go somewhere else.
That's what Ryan Garcia, by all intents and purposes, did to get that Gervonta Davis fight. I don't care about DAZN and Showtime and De La Hoya and Mayweather and all of that stuff. This is the fight that I want. I want that fight. Don't talk to me about any other fight.
Yeah,
that of course can happen.
It's unusual.
And Lennox Lewis said it. Like if there was somebody I wanted to fight, I would tell my promoter I'm fighting him. Go and make the deal. I wouldn't say to the promoter, "Can we do this? Can we do that?" I'd tell the promoter, "Either I want to fight. You work for me. You go make the fight." But I mean, I'm going back on what I was saying. You don't hear Davis often do many sit-down interviews or podcasts or things like that.
Really?
And somebody had said to him, and this was before the Garcia fight, how many times have you gone to your promoters and said, I want this guy or I want that guy or make this fight? Basically what we've just discussed there. And he said, I've never done that. He said, I've never done that because, I don't feel the need to do that. And look, whether or not people like it or not, he is being paid very, very well and been brought on well.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can argue of the position he's found himself in. Still harbouring hopes. Feels like it's 2018 all over again. I really would still love to see him box Vasily Lomachenko. I think that is now a fight that you would make Davis a pretty good favourite in. But it's still a fight that we could have and should have and maybe in another time would have seen a few years ago.
Any idea what Lomachenko's contractual situation is with Top Rank? Whether he's just renewed whenever he did, and it's however many fights.
I think he's got, because
he's coming towards the end now.
Yeah,
and that's the point at which sometimes
someone
can just say, "Listen,
him,
I need this, and you're not going to do it. So thanks very much, but I'm off."
I don't know, to be honest. I think he's got one more left. They were talking about Kambosos for next year. Again, it seems as though Shakur Stevenson has tried to get that fight. Shakur Stevenson versus Vasily Lomachenko. He's, of course, chasing Devin Haney. Devin Haney versus Regis Prograis is supposed to be done for December the 9th until I see a poster.
Yeah, exactly.
Always one of those, isn't it? Like, until we see a poster, the fight ain't done. No sight, no fight, as they say.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's say that fight does happen, then you'd probably say, okay, once Haney goes to 140, he's not coming back.
He's gone, yeah.
And Lomachenko's not going to 140. So he may find himself, Lomachenko, in a position whereby he either has to box a Shakur Stevenson or he goes and does a free fight deal with PBC. One of those fights at PBC has to be a Gervonta Davis pay-per-view fight, because that is a big pay-per-view fight in the States. And again, now it is a fight that I do feel that Davis would be a favourite in. But as far as, being the legacy fighter, so to speak, and going and winning all the belts and doing this and doing that, I'm quite sure that there have been talks between Davis and Haney in their respective camps and making that fight. But then you get into the age-old, okay, well, Haney brings all the belts, but Davis brings all the money. Where does the thing go? Because is the champion going to take a... Yeah,
and what that, like you say, what that all comes down to then is how much does he care about winning all the belts, Davis? He may or he may not. We all assume that fighters will, but it's not like he hasn't already won belts. And as you say, he's in this situation, in this groove with PBC, where I can understand why, if they say to him, this is who you're fighting next and this is how much you're getting, he'd think, all right, yeah, that sounds fine. That sounds fine to me, because I'm probably going to beat him. No one's going to suggest that he's scared, like we say, that he's scared of going up against anyone, but, this is what you get paid. Here's your date. Great. And if it just so happened that PBC can get something above and beyond that at some point, even better. But why would you disrupt that?
Why would you fight a William Zepeda? Like someone like a Zepeda who, okay, he's building well and he's a good fighter and he's well ranked, but okay, he fights on DAZN, which doesn't have the same sort of reach as Showtime, of course. And Showtime in America is leading the way at the minute.
It is.
Particularly this year. They've had a fantastic year. Why do you then, again, not ideal, why do you then extend the olive branch and say, oh, Oscar, I know we get on really well. Why don't you come and box on Showtime? Or we'll send Davis to DAZN. It's just not going to happen.
No, that never happens.
Going back to the Stevenson thing, only in a case where you've got somebody in a Ryan Garcia mold, and even that almost wasn't enough to get it done, who puts the line in the sand and says, this is what's happening. And there has to be enough money at play for the network to not turn around and go, fine, go away then. It's a fine balance. You need to have enough clout whereby you can make those things happen, and it's just not really, it is quite rare that you get people to come to the table. You get an ESPN on one side and a Fox or a Showtime on the other time. It doesn't always work out that way. It's quite frustrating for me as a kind of self-confessed Gervonta Davis fan. Like, over the years, I think everyone's always really loved watching him box, because who doesn't like watching an explosive, dynamic puncher? But I've always really rated him really, really highly. I've always felt like he's a really good fighter, like a great fighter, whatever. But he hasn't had the fights where he's had the opportunity to show that against a Shakur Stevenson, a Lomachenko, or whoever. I was completely intoxicated by Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia. I didn't think Ryan Garcia really had much of a chance of winning the fight. I thought it was going to be a massive event, and I was completely captivated by all of it and everything that came with it. But it wasn't a fight where I was thinking, I wonder what happens when... Okay, there was that. Okay, if Ryan Garcia lands the left hook. But, I mean, outside of that, it didn't have any of the... It didn't get my juices going like it would if it was a different type of juice, I would say, for Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia than we would have had for Gervonta Davis versus Shakur Stevenson, which is a much smaller commercial fight, in my opinion, but a much better sporting occasion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, well, before we move on and talk about what's coming up this weekend, unfortunately on Friday night in Tijuana, Mexico, there was a tragedy at ringside during the Sabrina Perez bout with Sky Nicholson. Unfortunately, the death of Diego Arroyo, Sabrina Perez's trainer and husband, unfortunately with a heart attack in the last round and was unable to be revived. Everybody at Boxing News and here at the Boxing Show would just like to send their condolences to Diego Arroyo and Sabrina Perez and their family. So this weekend, Joe Joyce versus Zhilei Zhang. Andy spoke to Frank Warren a few weeks ago, and in his very frank way said that it's do or die for Joe Joyce. His career is on the line against Zhilei Zhang, and I don't disagree with him.
No, it is. It absolutely is, because one of the drawbacks, as we've discussed in the past, of turning pro quite late, like Joe did, although it's not as bad at heavyweights as it would be at some other weights, is that you don't really have time for many setbacks, and he hasn't had any until now. What that means in this scenario is that he really had no choice but to go straight into the rematch, and pretty much everybody does that now, but you don't actually have to. It's just become this trend that everybody does, and sometimes it's a good idea and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you understand that commercial reasons dictate that that's what you have to do, but that actually, if you were just to make a pure boxing decision, you wouldn't do it. AJ Usyk's the classic example. I don't really know anyone who analyses boxing, are former pros, who thought that from a pure boxing point of view that was a good idea, but they all understood why it had to happen. This isn't quite in that bracket, obviously, but he's gone straight back into the rematch, basically because at this stage of his career, what else is he going to do? He needs to regain that ground almost straight away. It's not the same as Dillian Whyte going straight into a rematch with Povetkin, but it's a similar-ish kind of scenario, because you want to get that mandatory place back, because that's the only... You have to. It's just as simple as that. I'm really fascinated by it, because I didn't see what happened in April coming. I didn't see that coming. I was really, really up for the fight, because you've got two huge units who generally stand in front of each other and whack. And that's exactly what we got, but we just got one who landed way more on the other one than anything that came back. And it was just quite weird to watch, to be honest, just watching Joyce get hit again and again and again with that left hand. And his knees did dip, and for the first time he did get stopped in his tracks, and for the first time you could see him thinking, this is different. And okay, he never went down, and who knows what might have happened if the eye hadn't closed and he got into the second half of the fight. But it did close, and it correctly got stopped. So mentally, I wonder, it's what I always wonder about mentally, what has that done to him? What effect has that had on him? Because maybe we all got a bit carried away with the whole Juggernaut thing, that he can't be hurt, because if you think about it after the event, what a ludicrous thing to say and think that is, because everybody can be, and everybody at some point always is, and he was. And Zhang will just be bursting with confidence, because he'll be confident again that just nice loose left hand will find the target, and when it does, I think he'll be pretty confident of a repeat.
Yeah, there's a lot of intangibles to this, which I think makes it such an interesting fight. It's similar to another rematch that we saw recently with Chris Eubank Jr. and Liam Smith, where I'm more intrigued by the rematch than I was. Although, to be fair, I was really actually quite excited for the same reasons as you said about this fight, because you got two big lumps who really like to throw hands, and I did expect,
and the two unusual kind of characters as well, like they, just as people, you don't get loads out of Zhang because he doesn't speak much English, but he comes across as being very amiable, you know, quite good fun. You know, Dev Sani got him to say, chat shit, get zhanged, you know, and they're not pulling the wool over his eyes, they're not just mugging him off, saying he doesn't really know what he's saying. He knew, he agreed to it, he understood what it was.
Went for a Chinese with Big John Fisher.
Yeah, it's stuff like that, you know. And I know some people look at that and they take a dim view of it and feel that it's not really appropriate. But at the same time, it's fun. And if he's agreed to it and he knows what it is and he's happy to do it, that's his decision. Like, you're not going to get someone like him to do something he doesn't want to do, because good luck.
Who's going to tell him?
Who's going to tell him? Exactly. So I really enjoyed that. I thought that side of it was really fun. And it was two huge units just getting in there and looking to let their hands go. And I can't wait to see it again. I think it's going to, it's going to be very, very interesting, to say the least.
It's got great potential, as I felt the first fight had as well, purely because I think we've said this on the pod a few times across the course of the last few years, where for 3 or 4 rounds, he's as dangerous as they come, Zhilei Zhang. I did like a little preview before we started here. Check it out, 101 Boxing, big up 101 Boxing, where I said that, do you remember the Jerry Forrest fight? He boxed Jerry Forrest and he looked unbelievable for 3 or 4 rounds, and then for the next 6 rounds was desperately trying to stay on his feet just through exhaustion, and he was flopping around the ring, and I think he dropped Jerry Forrest 3 times or maybe even 4 times in a 10 rounder, and it was still a draw. But purely because the last 3 or 4 rounds of the fight, he's just flopping from one side of the ring to the other, Zhilei Zhang, because he's absolutely knackered. But for those first 3 or 4 rounds, he's lighting up Jerry Forrest like a Christmas tree. Whereas up until Jared Anderson went through Jerry Forrest, we'd never seen anybody do that to him, really. Sort of a very durable guy. And then against Hrgović, the first 3 or 4 rounds against Hrgović, he was very, very dangerous. Dropped Hrgović in that fight with a right hook, which I think is very significant, because I think that everybody and anyone with eyes who watched the first fight knows that you need to get away from the left hand. But that right hook is a serious shot as well. And if Joe Joyce is so preoccupied with that left hand and moving away from the left hand, you are moving into the right hook. And the right hook from Zhilei Zhang is a serious shot. Now, a lot of people, yourself included, just mentioned there about the eye going, and if the eye didn't go, we all know that it did, so it's kind of much of a muchness at this point. But the other way of looking at it is, if one of those big shots that did buckle the knees landed on the chin just lands just a millimetre this way or that way, then who knows what would have happened then. It's the first time we've seen Joyce badly hurt, and he was badly hurt, certainly in that second round. We've seen him hurt to the body by Bryant Jennings, but never with a headshot. And you touched on it there. While he didn't get knocked out cold, he didn't get dropped, didn't finish the fight on his ass, there was a definite hesitance of closing the distance and getting back to, or really not even getting back to, getting going, what has made Joe Joyce successful so far as a pro. Once you have an impenetrable, or not, an uncrackable, certainly penetrable, uncrackable chin get cracked, the answer is always, okay, how do you then prepare for it next time? In the back of your mind, which is one of the things that we were both so impressed with Chris Eubank Jr.'s performance against Liam Smith in the rematch, is knowing that you can be hurt and then going in there and still executing. But with respect to Joe Joyce and his skills, it has been somewhat predicated up to this point as a pro on this being an indestructible man who can be hit with big shots, but it doesn't matter, he'll grind you down. I mean, you're not talking about Zhilei Zhang or even the Daniel Dubois of the world. I remember watching Joe Hanks land a good shot on him on the Wilder Fury undercard. I remember thinking at the time, Paul, you can't take too many of those as you're going through the levels. Christian Hammer hit him with a couple of really good right hands. Carlos Takam was winning pretty much every round of that fight until he wasn't. A bit of a dodgy stoppage, I felt, in that fight as well. But Joyce kind of has this tendency, it's not even a tendency, it's just how he fights, of going through the motions really in those early rounds until he can grind you down. Was there a point in the first fight back in April where you felt that he was just starting to get on top? Because I felt after probably 4 or 5, true to form really, with Zhilei Zhang, he did start to slow down a little bit, but by that point the damage had been done.
Yeah, I feel like if it had gone into the second half of the fight, he may well have won. But like you, I'm not really one to put any value in that kind of hypothetical, because we saw what actually did happen. And the facial damage was a reminder that to stop somebody, you don't actually have to knock them out. Other things can happen. You cut them, you get that kind of swelling, and the referee has no choice but to stop it. So that's another reason why you can't be reckless when it comes to fighting too much with your face. And I think I definitely did get carried away with the whole indestructible chin thing, because I remember thinking to myself at one point, maybe he is that guy. And he's also got the athleticism as well, and some boxing skills and the pedigree that maybe as a package he will be able to go all the way, because people we've seen before who've had that kind of reputation, they've been lacking in some other areas, and maybe that's what they've completely relied upon. Whereas with him, he's got other stuff. But it turned out that inevitably, and it was inevitable, that he can be hurt. But he did recover. And that it is allied with the fact that Zhang does tend to, his tank does seem to empty quite quick, which is interesting because the way he boxes, it is actually quite an economical style. He doesn't throw big, wide, winging shots. Almost everything he throws, apart from that right hook, is a straight shot. Most of them don't travel that far. And the mechanics of it are such that takes the least amount of energy out of you, throwing those, sliding out that straight left hand if you're a southpaw, straight punches basically, and they're extremely effective. But it is an issue that he's got, and there's just no denying it. I mean, one thing I'll be interested to see is what weight he comes in at. Joe, he was about a stone lighter.
Yeah, he was
a bit more than that, I think.
£15, 15 and a quarter.
Yeah, and at the time, I didn't really think too much of that, because in percentage terms, when you're that heavy, it's not that much. But I did see him during the week, and I thought he does look a bit lighter. Just, you could see it. It didn't take a rocket scientist. And I chatted to Larry Wade, his S&C guy, who I know a bit, and he said, "Yeah, look, I just wanted. I thought we could take a little bit of weight off. It's not going to mean he's going to be flying around the ring, but I just thought there was a bit on there that didn't really need to be there. A few less bicep curls, they're not going to make you punch any harder." And I thought, actually, that makes sense. But then when what happens, people then think that extra stone could have helped him soak it up a bit better. But I don't really agree with that, because I just feel like the issue was that he just got hit far too often. And it wouldn't have mattered if he'd been another 5 stone heavier. That's the problem.
It's also worth pointing out he was the same weight when he boxed Bryant Jennings, and he was only 2 3/4 pounds heavier when he boxed Daniel Dubois. So it's not an alien weight to him. He's not making a foreign weight that his body's completely not used to boxing.
No, exactly. So I don't. Not for me. That wasn't an issue. But I know plenty of people whose opinion I totally respect. You think it was? Who felt that it was too much to take off against someone like Zhang, who's a big dude, as we know, and they could well have a point.
Yeah, I mean, I was unfortunate enough to be ringside right in the, because Frank, for the people who are not aware, when you go to some shows, you get your seat and it has your name on it, and it's often spelt wrong, and you sit where you're supposed to sit, and then you get out. Whereas a Frank Warren show, I'm giving everyone a tip here, don't sit in my seat, but if you get there early, it's a bit of a free-for-all. You can sit right at the front, which is great for people like me who usually get tossed to the side somewhere because they look really scruffy. Which wasn't that enjoyable watching Joseph Parker and Joe Joyce probably this far away from me beating 7 bells of shit out of each other.
Yeah.
Because that was a really brutal fight and really brutal night. Certainly for Joseph Parker. But the point I'm trying to make there is that I remember thinking at the time, I was so impressed with Joyce's movement. And this is Joyce's 271. He was just over 271 pounds. Thought the jab was good. I thought he varied the jab much better than we've seen it in the past as well. Thought he was moving off the line a lot better than we've seen him in the past as well. So when we saw him against Zhang the first time and coming in a bit lighter, I mean, the conventional wisdom would say that, that does make you a bit more mobile and nimble. And I felt like he didn't at all. I felt like he looked completely stuck in the mud, which was completely incongruous when you're thinking about the weights of both fights. I felt he looked so much more fluid against Parker.
It could just be that he had a terrible, terrible night. And he's not made any excuses. People often, say, I'm not making excuses, but I don't remember him literally trying to make a single one. All he said was that was a terrible night. I'll be back. He didn't say anything else. Maybe he did feel a bit flat. Maybe he didn't feel quite right. It's impossible to peak for that 1 hour every single time. So maybe it was just a terrible performance because, you look at the performance against Dubois as well. He didn't really get hit much by Dubois, not that I remember. No. Got on the jab. And after that, people were talking about, actually, this guy is way more than just this juggernaut. and he showed it at times. So it could be as simple as it really just wasn't his night, because it was weird sitting there watching him just get relentlessly hit by exactly the same punch. And people talk quite a lot about, you know, his amateur background, and he'll have come up against southpaws and all the rest of it, and he should know how to deal with them. Some people just find them really difficult, and always have and always will. And I don't remember him boxing loads of southpaws when I watched him as an amateur, to be honest with you. I can't really remember any that spring to mind. Certainly none of his big rivals for that Rio cycle were. I'm pretty sure about that. So it could be that simple. The explanation could be that simple, that he wasn't there mentally, physically, whatever it is, and he will never be that bad again.
Frampton said, I think it was Frampton, said while the Carl Frampton, obviously, big up Carl Frampton, was said beforehand, like while they were doing the pads, he's like, it looks like he's teaching him stuff that he should already know here on the pads. We all see trainers go through like the final, like refined moments. Okay, just remember this, and when he's doing that, you do this and stuff. But it was something that was pointed out beforehand, that, you know, he looked like he's just instructing him now on how to box a southpaw, which is a concern, because I mean, Joe Joyce he's not an old man, but he's the wrong side of 35. Which, okay, it matters less in heavyweight boxing than it does in other divisions, but that's still, and I know he came to the sport later, so it's not like it's been ingrained in him since he's 6-7 years of age. But we haven't really seen that version of him that boxed Daniel Dubois since then.
True.
And going into a fight where you now have to change, even going back to that, it's still an orthodox fighter that you fought anyway. So the stuff that you were working on then, you have to do it all in reverse anyway. And Joyce is, you know, a good boxer and a good amateur, but his strengths are his durability, his engine. Yeah. You can't get away from that.
And they were then as well.
Yeah.
Like that's not something that's just happened since he's so professional.
Yeah. So you're not like changing the...
You can't put in what isn't there.
That's kind that's kind of where I keep going back to with this fight. I did feel like Zhang was slowing down, but the damage had already been done by that point. And provided Joyce makes significant changes in the rematch, that damage is going to be done again in the rematch. Whether or not the eye goes, okay, again, what I'd said before, okay, maybe the eye doesn't go, but maybe the one that lands on a chin lands properly on a chin and pings him. Yeah. Because it is a massive change.
When you get hit that often, I was talking to Tris about this not that long ago, Tris Dixon, and he was saying to me, I think he'll mind me saying this, he was saying that Joyce came up and he just said, yeah, he's a funny one, Joe, because people talk about how well he's been moved in his career. And he said, I don't really agree, because he's just been in loads of fights where he's just taken loads and loads and loads of punches, and it will catch up with you. And obviously this is something he's looked into really, really closely with the book he wrote. So he probably watches fights. Damage. Tremendous book, Damage. Really he probably watches fights slightly differently to the rest of us.
Yeah, he does, yeah. I love Tris Dixon, by the way.
I think it was absolutely inevitable that he would. But when he said it, I just thought, actually, yeah, I always felt like he had been matched really well, but maybe he wasn't, because they put him in with people who were going to stand in front of him and they would throw back, and Joe would be able to take it, eventually get on top of them and walk through them. Happy days. Maybe he needed more variety rather than just play to his strengths all the time.
He was moved in a way, and certainly not slating. I was going to say the promoters. He's had a few, hasn't he? A few people calling the shots over the course of his career, but it feels like he was matched in a way that did get him to a very, very good position pretty quickly when you consider when he turned over and heavyweight division as far as
that's the mission, isn't it?
Exactly,
that's the mission. So it's very difficult to criticise that, but when you think about somebody who turns over professional, we talk about you get them a tall guy, you get them a short guy, you get them a southpaw, you get an orthodox, you get them a puncher, you get them a spoiler, and I guess they just felt like they didn't really have time for that, or maybe that he didn't need it because he spent all that time in the amateurs.
Yeah, a lot of the guys, it's just running through. I'm going to go from kind of the Lenroy Thomas, the post Lenroy Thomas era, as we will refer to it as. Okay, maybe the post Joe Hanks, but even then, Joe Hanks, he knocked him out in a round, so okay, it wasn't a big problem. But I remember him got caught with a shot there, and I'm thinking, oh bloody hell! Like, anyway, Bermain Stavern, respectfully, not the biggest test. Kind of stand there and let you do your thing. Ustinov, that version of him, very much the same.
Massive.
massive a lump and is there to be
Yeah.
it. Bryant Jennings, which was a good fight, and Bryant Jennings is probably the anomaly here on Joe Joyce's record by being a smaller guy, nimble guy, good feet, good hand speed. And he gave him problems, hurt him really bad with a body shot in the first round of that fight. Joyce still won and won pretty clear, but it was a fight that did show some of the limitations, I felt. Then after that, you've got the COVID era. So Michael Wallish, going to stand there. Daniel Dubois, obviously very good performance, but Daniel is quite ABC in the way that he approaches things. Joe Joyce would have seen many styles like that in the amateurs. Carlos Takam, who did land a lot of those shots, but again
he landed a hell of a lot.
He was winning the fight. I thought he won every round.
Well, he did, and there's no other way you could score it. I was at that fight, and he landed a hell of a lot. And that it was after that fight really that the kind of the juggernaut thing particularly gathered steam, because that was what people were talking about. Okay, yeah, he did take a lot, but he walked through them all and then finished him in the sixth. It's like you're not even at halfway, and that at that point maybe he started to kind of think in those terms himself, because Takam, has been up there, hasn't he? He's a very respected guy, still doing pretty well now,
good win recently.
And he can dig, and maybe you would start to think to yourself, well, I took all of that and I didn't even blink, so. But maybe this is the way to do it. It's
again what you've referenced there by mentioning Tris and damage, and it's not a case of, this isn't like a normal day at the office where you go, cool, that was hard. That was a hard day at work.
No, it takes something away from you.
Yeah, it does. And this whole kind of he got through it. How do people know? How do people know that he got through it? Like, does Joe even know whether or not he got through it or not? It's something
how much of himself did he leave in there? Like we were saying before, wins sometimes you never think about what a win takes away, but. It is hit and don't get hit, and obviously different people have different styles and different fights. Certain fighters, they will take more than other ones, but you do still have to try and minimise the amount you get hit to the least possible. And
these are not small men. You're being hit by. There's like his last 5 opponents, and all of them, Dubois did land some decent shots. It was very close on the cards, that fight, but it was one of those where Dubois was at times winning the battle and Joyce was winning the war. If you look at
that's how I saw that one.
Yeah,
that's how I saw that one.
The last 5 opponents: Daniel Dubois, Carlos Takam, Christian Hammer had some success in less than 4 rounds, but had some success. Joseph Parker
landed plenty of
that big
really
right hand
big,
in the 6th round,
solid shots on him. He landed them all night, and that's why Andy left him in there as long as he did, because Andy Lee, because you're standing there and you're thinking to yourself, you have to be. At some point, one of these is going to be the one too many, surely, because he was just hitting him with great shots, digging his toes in and winding up, because you can wind up and load up against Joyce because he's there.
And he's taller as well. Yeah. So Parker was really dipping down and winging that right hand
almost jumping off his feet when he was throwing them.
Zhilei Zhang. So then you've got, out of those 5 fights, that's quite a lot of punishment to take, and nobody, including, as we've said, Joe Joyce, really may know how much he took or how the effects of that will be for 10, 20 years maybe.
Yeah.
And that is the very kind of, sorry to bore people and be a little bit kind of, I don't know, academic. This is why I usually leave it to people like Tris rather than us. But it is true, and it does matter, how you recover from those shots, or how you are the next time you go back into camp, and it's another X amount of weeks of sparring with heavyweight guys all looking to take your head off in that Fight Club gym in Las Vegas that he trains out of. There's no tech sparring in that gym, so it's a really difficult fight, and I do lean towards Zhilei Zhang in this fight. I feel like after the first fight, picking Joyce, so you're picking based on kind of a lot of intangibles falling in your favour that didn't last time. There's so many things that you can point to reasons why, okay, it could have been that, could have been that, could have been that, could have been that.
Yeah, what we're talking about here really is if we fancy him to get the win, we're fancying him to get the win doing it the really, really hard way.
Yeah.
The really hard way. And that might not be a good thing for him.
Yeah, I don't see Sugar Ray Joe in the first 4 rounds getting behind the jab and kind of not taking any shots. I think just the way that you mentioned that he doesn't move, which is one of the reasons why I was so impressed with the Parker performance. While he did take some big shots in that fight, it was back to the Dubois fight where he was jabbing and moving his head off the line every time.
He can do it.
He can do it,
and he's not stupid. Like he will know that he has to. He will know that he can't do what he did last time and expect there to be any other result. It's possible that there could be another result, but as we say, the cost that would incur, that win, doing it that way, is, you know, we look at fights, and I was talking to George Groves about this the other week, and, you know, the idea that we all salivate about all-out wars and how brilliant that is and all the rest of it, but that can't be what you want as a boxer every time you go in there. They all want to have one to prove that they can do it at least once. It's a pride thing. It's a warrior thing, isn't it? You know, you see fights. Look at Bradley, for example, against Provodnikov. Deliberately fought the wrong fight because he wanted to show people that he could do that. But I think he probably looks back on it now and just thinks, like, what were you thinking? They all want to do it, but they can't. You can't do that every time you go in there. It's just not. It's not sustainable.
No, it isn't. I don't remember what George had said about. Yeah, it's good for you guys, but you're thinking
it's great for us.
Maybe Joyce did start to buy into that, and you know now maybe he's not of that thought where it's like, because it was said in the press conference, wasn't it, on Fight Week? Everybody has a plan until they punch me in the face and nothing happens.
Yeah,
and it
great
was
line.
Great line, but I wonder if he feels the same way now. My guess is no.
Yeah, exactly. This and what that is what's really interesting, because, like I said, he didn't make any excuses, literally zero, and he's just gone away. He's disappeared again, like he always does, because he's not one to court any kind of publicity. And he'll have been having a very, very good think about things, and he'll have been talking to his trainer. They've got a good bond, the pair of them, haven't they? Him and Salas, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing him during the week, and very much to what he does on Saturday. He is capable of doing it a slightly different way. He's shown that before, and he does have to, even if he doesn't want to. I suspect he probably will want to, though, after what happened the first time. But even if he didn't really want to, he's bright enough to realise that is what has to happen.
Just the final thing on Joyce versus Zhang, you touched on it in your opening gambit. The timing of the rematch, again, agreeing with what you've said about the Anthony Joshua, Andy Ruiz fight and the Alexander Usyk fight, and you know, sometimes fights have to be taken for political reasons as opposed to sporting reasons, I suppose. I feel like we've both sort of said that this is one of those fights that it feels like that. I'm not sure why, though, purely because in a different way to those fights, the WBO mandatory is not due yet. No. The IBF mandatory is due next.
Yep.
Then the WBO mandatory could be due in a year. I feel like maybe if Joyce would have boxed an Otto Wallin or someone like that, get him used to a southpaw who is, you know, Wallin is a capable fighter. He's not a dangerous fighter. He's not somebody that you would expect to go in there and, you know, really put a beating on anybody, really. It's just not how he boxes. He's quite compact, good technician, can obviously punch his weight. He's a heavyweight, but somebody like that. That's the only thing about this fight that I did look at and think, okay, well, I'm not sure why. But then it goes back to something that we said earlier and something that I mentioned in my preview about the currency being, for some fighters, in the belts. For a Gervonta Davis, he doesn't need to be interim champion of anything or because it doesn't matter. The real mandatory challenger in boxing is and will forever be the pound note. That's the real mandatory challenger. Everything else is a voluntary. Whereas for Joyce, for Lawrence Okoli, somebody like that, their value can be, for Devin Haney, more of an extreme version of it. Obviously, being an undisputed champion and a big name in his own right is not the name of a, you know, he doesn't transcend the sport like a Canelo or a Mayweather or a Davis getting to that point. So that's probably the only reason why going in there with somebody like Zhang straight after that fight could make sense. But I can't help but think that this is the wrong fight for Joe Joyce, and that the payoff of becoming the WBO interim champion maybe isn't worth the risk of him getting beaten again and completely shut out, particularly when you consider the fact as well that Zhilei Zhang is signed with Queensberry now. So for Queensberry, you can manoeuvre that, and Zhilei Zhang, you have a big homecoming in the Birds Nest. Frank's worldwide now, isn't he? He's Saudi Arabia 1 week, he's Telford the next, Beijing and the Birds Nest following shortly soon. And then doing a Joyce versus Zhang next summer or something like that, and getting Joyce a southpaw or a Wallin or somebody like that, for November time of this year, I feel like may have been, not complaining because I love the fight and I'm really interested in the fight, but just trying to understand the mechanics of doing it, I suppose.
Yeah. Frank's been around heavyweights in particular for so long, hasn't he? It's always really interesting to kind of try and look behind the curtain a bit and see what might be going on there, because I was interested to see the other day that they're putting Dubois forward for Joshua. Now, they realise...
It's before or after the Usyk rematch?
They realise that's before. That's never going to happen. But at the same time, I do pay attention to it to a degree, because I do believe that he thinks, Frank, that Dubois would beat Joshua. I believe that is what he believes by saying that. I do wonder how much belief he's ever really had in Joyce, because they didn't sign him, did they? He's kind of, and Dubois was his guy.
Haymaker ring star signing.
Of course. And Dubois was his guy in that fight, and he was very confident in Daniel that night. And since then, they've kind of got on the train, kind of albeit a bit reluctantly. And yeah, as you say, they signed Zhang, and I guess it would have been Joyce's decision, but maybe Frank's happy for him to take the rematch because he's got both guys. He doesn't really think he's going to win it, but if he does, it'd be a bonus.
Yeah, it is interesting. And also the Daniel Dubois rematch for Joe Joyce could be a fight. Certainly if you're Frank Warren and you're in the Daniel Dubois business, as he is, of course, and you look at...
His belief in Dubois never really seems to have wavered particularly, does it? Which is kind of interesting.
I'd be interested to one day, away from the cameras, ask Frank if he really thought Daniel Dubois would knock out Alexander Usyk. I have to say, I'm sure he'd tell me on camera, absolutely yes, and look, I'm sure he'd tell me off camera, absolutely yes as well. And I'm sure, to be fair, he'd tell me off camera, well, he did knock him out, didn't he? Look,
yeah,
and then I have to sit through the whole thing and read the appeal again. It's just long. I can't be doing that. But the Joyce Dubois rematch does make a lot of sense. But should Joyce lose to Zhilei Zhang and then they do Dubois versus Joyce, there'd be a huge risk that Dubois would then lose to a guy who really doesn't offer anything, and he would kind of put Joyce in the... Another loss kind of puts him in, and I guess this is probably a reason why I'm trying to work it through mechanics in my head. I guess there's probably a reason why doing the rematch straight away doesn't actually matter that much, purely because from like a who needs him perspective, because if he takes the rematch and loses, he's in the who needs him club. If he doesn't take the rematch, he's in the who needs him club. So he might as well take the rematch.
Yeah.
Because then if he wins the rematch, he has the interim bout, he's back on course. The WBR, I'm sure, would call a mandatory within 12 months, regardless of what happens. The IBF are queuing up now for Hrgovic, so they are after that. We've had the WBA now. You could end up doing Joyce versus Dubois 2 for the WBO interim belt, with the winner boxing Alexander Usyk or somebody this time next year or later next year as the WBO mandatory. That could work. Just trying to... go through Frank Warren's...
Yeah, and the situation at heavyweights is complicated, isn't it? Because obviously the WBC have allowed Fury to do what he's doing, and there's just nothing really happening. There's just nothing really happening, and pessimistically, we kind of feel like the next thing that Usyk will do is probably have a mandatory. It's probably box Hrgovic. I'd love to be more positive about Fury Usyk, but I'm just not really, and that's not based on anything particularly tangible. It's just I don't get that vibe from it, of it being something that's necessarily going to happen, because we've had so long to have an undisputed fight at heavyweight, over 5 years now, and at no point has it happened. So why is it going to happen now? You know, that's kind of where I am with it, which doesn't really make sense. You know, it doesn't. You know, history does not always inform what's going to happen in the immediate future, but I just don't really feel like it is. And we look at Joshua Wilder and we kind of feel like that's probably not going to happen either. And it's all just a bit shit, isn't it? It
always comes back to money, as we discussed earlier on. And from I'm very much of the same opinion. Joshua Wilder, for the Undisputed, had a lot of money on the table. That was a big fight, really big fight. So 2018 was a massive fight, that was. Fury Joshua, another massive fight, really huge fight. Fury Usyk, big fight. It's not as big as those two fights.
No, it is about the belts, that one, isn't it?
That is about the belts.
And they all would have been, but they were more
clear that
they all
not
would have been, but they were
asked.
more than that, weren't they?
Yeah, for sure. They were
Wilder's
huge events.
And Wilder was ringside at Wembley for the Klitschko fight, and he's just literal box office Deontay Wilder with the way he goes about things.
You think pre-Ruiz won, the week before that, Wilder knocked out Dominic Breazeale in a round.
Yep.
And then if Joshua would have gone and, let's say, Ruiz doesn't get up in the third round, God, how different would everything be?
Yeah, really different.
Then you've got
really different
2 emphatic stoppages, and then that would have been the time. Who knows? They'd have dragged it out, I'm sure. But that would have been the time to make that. So I don't know. I feel like when everything boils down to the money, and you consider that Fury Usyk probably doesn't make as much money as those other fights that also didn't happen.
And I do feel as well now that the Saudi situation is now a problem.
Yeah.
Whereas beforehand, them having the financial firepower to make these things happen, or potentially make these things happen, whatever people thought about it, it did seem to be a plus, because they would just be able to get it over the line by just paying whatever they needed to pay. But there do seem to be problems there, because they just haven't really put on many fights. And the problem is that now that it's out there as a possibility, and it still might be, no one really wants to do anything for what previously would have been a normal amount of money for a massive, massive fight. They want double, because that's what... It's not that people have got used to it, because not that many people have actually received it. Joshua's had it twice. Andy Ruiz has had it once. Usyk's had it once. And Jake Paul and Tommy Fury have had it. But once it gets into fighters' heads that that's a possibility, then they're not going to want to do it for anything less than that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've seen at the minute, we've kind of Fury and Ngannou, it's kind of a different subsection of Saudi boxing that is kind of putting that on as well. Are we going to get into a position where you've got kind of, I don't think it is the case, but you've got kind of rival promoters within Saudi, so then that just muddies the water even further? Is it with Skill Challenge? Is it with His Excellency, whose name I've forgotten, not very excellent from me, apologies, follows me on Twitter actually, which is an interesting one. Yeah, he loves the giant pizzas, absolutely loves them.
Bit of breakfast chat.
Yeah, I'll be bringing some breakfast chat to Saudi next time I'm over there. But yeah, I mean, it looks as though you kind of, when you say it like that, it does paint a pretty bleak picture, in a sense of there has been a lot of talk, and you consider that Joshua Ruiz 2 was December 2019. That's nearly 4 years. 3 fights in nearly 4 years.
Boxing Super Series final as well. They had that too. But
was that wasn't with Skill Challenge though? That was just in Saudi. No, that wasn't Skill Challenge. No. So that was, it was done in Jeddah, but I don't think that was done by them. So kind of a very kind of basic overview of Saudi boxing at the minute. So I want to get his name right, just in case I offend him. I really don't want to offend him. Okay, so His Excellency, gotta get that in. His Excellency Turki Al Sheikh. He's the owner of Almeria Football Club in Spain.
Right.
My sources in Saudi tell me that he is the 5th most important or powerful politician in Saudi Arabia.
Is he Newcastle United as well? He's not. That's somebody else.
I think that is from PIF, the Public Investment Fund.
That's right.
So as I understand it, Skill Challenge applied to PIF. PIF then give the money. This guy has his own money, and he has lots of it, and he is the most...
And he doesn't have to apply to anyone.
He doesn't have to apply to anybody for anything.
He can decide
ever.
On the phone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right, okay.
So is that going to be a good thing? Is this going to lead to more of the fights that we want to see? I guess it remains to be seen. But yeah, when you kind of put it like that, and I think this has been something that's probably... the last 3 or 4 months of having these promises of fights that we've not seen has started to, I mean, it's even longer than that. Jesus. I mean, it has been about 12 months that these negotiations have been open, and it was longer than 12 months since Joshua Usyk 2.
Yeah. Because when they were talking about Fury Usyk and Joshua Wilder on the same night, on the same card, I didn't feel like that was some kind of cloud cuckoo land. I felt like that was realistic when they said it, because I just thought, well, you do have the means to make this happen. Why do them both on the same night when you could have 2 massive shows? Wouldn't that be kind of better? Was my initial thought, but I wasn't thinking to myself, well, that's absolutely ludicrous. That'll never happen. I thought to myself, yeah, that could happen. But it hasn't happened.
It hasn't happened at all. But one thing that will be happening this weekend before we round things off, we're just going to have a little chat about Richardson Hitchins and Jose Zepeda, who boxed this weekend in Florida on a Matchroom card. I like Richardson Hitchins. I think this is a good fight for him. Jose Zepeda is kind of, depending on what version of him you get, on his night is an excellent fighter. And for Hitchins, who's kind of come over to Matchroom on the back of the, he was with Mayweather for a while, and he was kind of a highly touted prospect over there. I think this is a good fight for him. And if he wins this, it really puts him there or thereabouts for a world title shot, I think.
Yeah, and he's been telling us all for a good while, hasn't he, that's where he needs to be, that he's going to be right up there at the top of the sport, that he can be one of the biggest names in the sport. He just needs the opportunity, and he's constantly calling out Haney and Davis and everybody you can think of, really. And we'll find out hopefully quite a lot more about him, because I like Zepeda. I've always liked Zepeda. We remember when he came over to box Flanagan for the WBO at lightweight, and I really felt sorry for him that night. I mean, who knows what would have happened in the rest of the fight, but for it to end like that is just really unfortunate. And if people don't quite remember it, they were both throwing simultaneously pretty much in the second round, and their arms tangled, and you could see immediately that his shoulder had come out, and it wasn't any kind of foul, accidental or otherwise, by Flanagan. So Marcus McDonald correctly called it a TKO. You've withdrawn through injury essentially, and he lost. And that's just a absolute shit ass of a way to lose a world title fight, isn't it? And then since then, he was in with Jose Ramirez, who he gave a really good fight, majority decision. Few people felt like Ramirez was a bit lucky that night, but he's a really strong fighter. And then more recently, he was stopped in 11th by Regis Prograis, and he was well down on the cards. But you look at the rub of the green that you need to win a world title sometimes, and he hasn't had it, because Manchester, unfortunate circumstances, very good fighter, and Ramirez pushed him all the way, and then you get the chance to fight for a vacant title, and you're hoping that you're going to get somebody not quite as good as Regis Prograis, aren't you, basically? So that's what's happened with him. But I feel like he's still got something left. And if he has, and Hitchins isn't quite what he thinks he is, then he could very easily get beaten. Yeah,
I really hope we get the version of Zepeda that we saw against Josue Vargas, the version that we saw at times against Prograis, because he is a very good fighter on his night. And I agree with you in a sense of, I felt like he was quite unfortunate against Ramirez. I thought it was a close fight.
He could have got it.
Yeah, it was a close fight. He could have, I think, is the best way to describe it, rather than should have. But I do feel like we've probably seen the best of him now.
I feel like we have as well.
Yeah.
And at that point, it just comes down to, it's just desire, isn't it? Because if you're into the stage where you're just doing it for the money, then that stage, I feel like it's generally speaking a fairly short one. When you've been up at the level he's been at, if you've been a pure professional where it's always been about the money, then you made that commitment a while ago, maybe because you're not going to win major titles, and this is what you do, and you need to get as much out of it before you have to stop. But if you've been up at that top end, it's never really been about that, although you hope that comes. So if you then mentally to make that switch between, I'm not going to win a world title, I've had 3 goes, it's not going to happen, now I'm going to keep dedicated and stay on the grind for the money, generally speaking, that doesn't last long, because it's not enough. It's not enough for them. No, agreed. Just having a look, it feels like a long time ago, probably because it was a long time ago, well, relatively speaking, the Baranchik fight, which was probably one of the best fights that you could ever wish to see. Yeah, wow, yeah. But a fight where crazy fight. We've spoken about it already at various different times of the show today, where you can't have many of those. No. And particularly at that stage of his career, wasn't a young man when he had that fight in front of a crowd. You know, like COVID boxing was, it was great to get boxing back, and it had its quirks, but I remember watching that, just thinking, God, imagine that like at the Forum or somewhere like that, with everybody going absolutely mental, or any kind of really atmospheric US venue. Just it would have been utter carnage, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Instead, it was in the bubble.
Yeah, and as it was actually a bit weird to watch, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Some people just too loud, just keeping on going down and getting back up again.
Yeah, that was a wild fight. 6 knockdowns. No, I think. So let's have a look. I'm going to try and get this.
I think it was.
I'll get his box rack up. Hang on. No, 8 knockdowns.
8.
Zepeda down twice in round 1 and once in rounds 2 and 5. So that's 4. Baranchik down once in rounds 2, 3, 4, and 5. 8 knockdowns. What a fight! But it kind of proves like, on the back of that. You know, in his next fight against Hank Lundy, he was pretty flat. And, you know...
And Baranchik's kind of finished now.
Well,
really,
on the back of that, Baranchik boxed Montana Love. Do you remember he boxed Montana Love on a Jake Paul undercard, and he was shot to pieces?
Yeah.
I felt like the damage was done to Baranchik in the Josh Taylor fight.
Because
that was a real hard fight. And then the Zepeda fight, I think, finished.
Yeah.
After that, that was it for him. Hank Lundy fight where he looked flat, and I mentioned the Josue Vargas fight, which was, you know, about where it could have. It was kind of one of those top ranked fights that we always love, where you've got two guys where, okay, what have they still got left? Let's put them together and find out. First round stoppage, a low key win before he boxed Regis Prograis, which is a hard fight. Getting stopped in the 11th round of any fight is often an indicator of a hard night's work.
Oh God, yeah. I mean that's late stoppages. You know that's really taken some of it away from you. There's just no way that it can't. Because you can't get into the 11th round, you know, fresh as a daisy.
No.
If you get stopped, then it's because your will's probably been broken a bit and you're exhausted. A combination of the two, and that's damage. That is damage.
And then he had a comeback fight against Niraj Goyat. Remember him?
Yeah, I do. He's supposed to fight Amir, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he had a motorcycle accident or something.
Yeah,
I
remember I presented the press conference for that, and then it didn't happen, and he ended up fighting Billy Dib, didn't he?
Yeah, with
that was in Saudi.
That was in Saudi again, not by skill challenge. That was Huey Fury and Sam Peter on the undercard.
That's it. Yeah,
Huey Fury versus the Nigerian Nightmare.
But they were making a big thing of that because it was India Pakistan, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was big. That was big. I think Khan will probably end up boxing over there at some point, won't he? Okay, right. Final thing that we're going to discuss before we break and are joined by Mr. Barry Jones is on the undercard this weekend. We see the return of Jessica McCaskill against our very own Sandy Ryan. Sandy Ryan goes for glory in her 8th professional fight against a very established world champion in Jessica McCaskill. Of course, now not the undisputed champion. Sandy Ryan, of course, has the WBO trinket at 147 pounds. But a good fight, a good clash of styles, I think, between McCaskill, who loves a tear up and loves nothing more than to come forward and let her hands go, and Sandy Ryan, who can box, but again, loves a fight.
Yeah, there's plenty to like about this. I fancy Sandy Ryan quite strongly in this fight. I think McCaskill is a great example of someone who I've got tons of admiration for her, because early on in her career things were difficult to get the attention, boxing around Chicago, to get onto cards, to push her career, to drive it. She had no amateur pedigree or background in that regard to put her up in lights, and she really did have to do it the hard way, and it was very ingenious, some of the things she did, you know, to just push her name forwards. And I remember meeting her when she boxed Katie Taylor. I thought she did a good, you know, decent performance that night. And since then, it's incredible what she's done, really. You know, it's absolutely remarkable. Undisputed champion at welter, unified champion at super lightweight. But I have always felt that she's quite limited, technically. And so long as Sandy Ryan handles the occasion okay and doesn't get dragged into something that she doesn't need to get dragged into, and just is able to establish that superior skill level, which I definitely feel she has as being the differential, then I think she can win relatively, not easily, but relatively clearly. I think STN, our pals at STN, Sean and Paul Reddy, have done a really good job with Sandy Ryan. I think the way she's been moved has been great. She had that defeat, but that was a good fight to have against the very tough, was it Anahi Sanchez?
Yeah.
The real tough Argentinian fighter. Maybe 3rd or 4th fight, 10 rounds, straight back into a rematch, won it. So you've got 20 really good hard rounds in there, which would have brought her on an awful lot. and now she's got a terrific opportunity, which potentially, and I know there's, again, there's the political problems, which potentially at some point could set up a fight with Jonas for undisputed, Natasha Jonas, who's got the other belt at welterweight.
That's an interesting fight potentially down the line. Jonas is she's up at 154, isn't she? Jonas. She's down at. Well, she's gone back down again, hasn't she?
Yeah. She won the IBF at 147 against Candy Wyatt.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, Candy Wyatt. Yeah.
So she's got the other belt, and whoever wins on the weekend will have the other 3. So from our point of view, we want it to be Sandy Ryan.
What does Sandy Ryan do with the WBO? Was that she won a belt?
Yeah, she's got one, and McCaskill's got the other 2.
Okay, it's difficult.
So that's for 3 of them.
So difficult to keep up as well because McCaskill's undisputed as well.
She was, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. But she vacated, the WBO and the IBF, or they came to an agreement, and they went another way, and Sandy Ryan won the WBO.
I think for Sandy Ryan in this fight, she has to just take a lot of confidence from how Chantel Cameron won her fight against Jess McCaskill. I think Cameron had to do little bits of everything in that, but primarily it was based on keeping the distance, getting behind the jab, and using your boxing skills.
Exactly that. That's all she really needs to do in the build up to this fight. Is in terms of how am I going to do this? Is just watch that, because Cameron, she just made sure that she made it count. That actually she's a better boxer than McCaskill. And that's easier said than done, because you've got to make sure you match the other person for desire and work rate and all of those things, because McCaskill will, she wants it, and that's why she's done so well. And that's why I've got so much admiration for her. But when you come up against somebody who has got superior skills to you, if they want it as much as you, it's very hard for you to beat them.
It certainly is. Okay, right, Andy, that brings us to the close of episode 30 of the Boxing Show. We are gonna film our Canelo Charlo preview after this, so keep an eye on that. We'll be coming to you at the usual time of 5 p.m. next Monday. But before we wrap things up, it is prediction time. Barry isn't here this week, so we've got 33% chance of us being right, I guess. I don't know, without him to influence us. I don't know what I'm saying, but anyway, we're going to start with you, Andy. Joe Joyce, Zhilei Zhang versus Joe Joyce 2. Who wins and how?
I'm going to go with my gut a bit on this one, which isn't what I normally do, and it's not kind of like I really like Joe. He's a very engaging guy, and I would love to see him win. I think he will get it done, and I think it will be on the basis of that was a terrible, terrible night back in April. And a few things caught up with him. The main one being this belief that he'd actually adopted that he could not be hurt. And now he knows that that's not true. I think we'll see something slightly different from him than we've seen in the last few fights. And that he'll get the win. Points.
Points?
Points. So I'm going to go points.
Okay. I'm going to go for Zhilei Zhang. I felt like Zhang was very dangerous before the first fight, and it kind of was almost like seeing all of the most extreme examples of that on the night. Kind of everything that I'd kind of thought, okay, well, Zhang could do this and could do that. He did all of those things. And I just don't think that... I think Joyce will be a little bit heavier and will try and box a bit more, but I just see those straight shots of Zhang being the difference. And whether or not he's able to stop Joyce, or he has to build a lead early on and then hang on quite literally in the second half of the fight, which we saw, didn't work against Filip Hrgović. But I do have to, based on the first fight, based on the evidence, which is the exact same reason why I picked Liam Smith to beat Chris Eubank Jr. in the rematch. Yeah,
but that's what I normally do, and that's the most logical thing to do. Almost all of the it is almost the most logical thing
based
to do.
On the evidence that we have.
Is there any chance, do you think, that given how Zhang does tend to gas in the second half of fights, that Joyce might think to himself, he's not going to get up on his toes and start flying around like a ballerina, but he could always just think, well, in the first half of the fight, what about I just step off a little bit?
Yeah, I think so.
Just get him moving.
But I think that
a bit,
it did change slightly, but as Joe kind of said, everybody has a chance everybody has a game plan until they get punched in the face, and I feel like the speed difference of Zhang is going to be the difference I think it was the difference in the first fight, and I just don't know how you address that in 5 months. I hope I'm wrong. Shouldn't say that really, but I do hope I'm wrong. And I expect a good fight, but I do lean towards Zhang. Zhang-tastic. Richardson Hitchins has been a long weekend. The double US late shows done me in. Richardson Hitchins versus Jose Zepeda.
I haven't seen loads of Hitchins. I have to admit that. So I'm not really going off. I've seen enough, but I'm not really going off an awful lot here. But I will pick him because he really, really needs it. And he is a good fighter. And I do feel like Zepeda has had a long career. And I don't really feel like at this stage, for some of the reasons I've outlined earlier, that the desire will be there to be able to go with someone like Hitchins, to be able to want it enough, basically, to turn in the kind of performance he'll need to win. So I'll say Hitchins, but I'll say points again.
Yeah, I'll go for Hitchins decision. I feel like sometimes you just want to see a little bit more from Hitchins. Go again, second phase, go through the gears a little bit. But good fighter, very fresh. Is kind of the word that I always attach to him. Very fresh. Like the shots come out nice and they zip out, and he's very. But just would like to see him maybe go through the gears. I think Zepeda is tricky enough and also carries enough of a threat as well, just to keep him honest. So I think the fight goes the distance. And then finally, Jessica McCaskill versus Sandy Ryan.
I'll say Sandy Ryan on points, but I think it will be close enough. Like I said earlier, I feel like she's got enough in her locker to be able to win it clearly enough, and I do think that because, you're away and you're the challenger, and generally speaking, you want to be winning it clearly enough, because if it's close, maybe you won't get it. But I think she's got the temperament for it. So I'd pick her on points.
Yeah, I'll go for Sandy Ryan. Points. I think it's got the potential, as many Jess McCaskill fights do, to be very scrappy.
Yeah.
Very scrappy, quite ugly fight, I think, at times. I think Sandy Ryan, like Chantel Cameron, really, I think they're both of a similar ilk, where they can both box, where they both like a fight as well, and they're both happy to have a fight. And I feel like she will have to fight in patches, but I feel like she'll do enough to get a decision. I
saw an interesting tweet from Amanda Serrano the other week. I'm sure you saw it. Just speaking of Chantel Cameron, and she just made a really, really good point, which is that Chantel Cameron no one talks about her. She's undisputed at her own weight. She's beaten Kaylee Taylor, who's undisputed at the weight below. She's beaten McCaskill, who's undisputed at the weight above. No one else has done that. I know Shields has won undisputed in 2 weight divisions, so that does put her where she is.
She didn't beat the champions to do it, though.
Yeah, I mean, what Cameron's done is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think maybe part of that is just Chantel Cameron's quite a quiet, reserved character. She doesn't really, hog the limelight or go searching for the.
But if she beats Taylor in a few weeks at the end of November again, which I do think she will, because it was pretty comprehensive the first time. I'd just be really interested to see what she does then.
That's not going to be 10 threes, is it?
No.
Serrano's is
12 threes.
Is it 12 threes as 12.
well? That's what they're planning.
That's a lot.
But that's why that WBC belt's not there, because they don't want it, do they?
Yeah. I sat through a seminar on women's boxing and why it's 10-2s and not 12-3s when we were in the convention last year. And the WBC are not going to sign off on that.
No, they've been like that from day one, haven't they?
Yeah, it is a massive jump in boxing in a sense of you got
20 minutes to 36,
20 minutes with 9 minutes rest,
to
36 minutes with 11 minutes rest. That's a big difference. That is a massive difference. So I'm interested to see that. The reason why I asked is because I think Chantel Cameron against Katie Taylor over 3-minute rounds. I think Cameron will stop her.
Oh, I do. Yeah, I do. And that's Taylor's an absolute joy. She's fantastic, but what you could see in that, when she boxed Linda Dartu at super lightweight, I felt like we'd never see her there again, because that would show them that she's just a dyed-in-the-wool lifetime lightweight, and it wasn't worth it. Of course this was worth it, because Undisputed was on the line, and she was always going to take the rematch back to rematches, because she's who she is, and there's just no way you'd be able to stop her. But it is difficult to see a different outcome.
It certainly is. Right, that's all we have time for today on episode 30 of The Boxing Show. As always, thanks very much for you, our audience, for joining us and listening to myself and Andy Clarke talk without Barry here this time. But he'll be back next week, fear not. Don't forget to let us know who you think's going to win. Is it going to be Zhilei Zhang or Joe Joyce? Will it be repeat or revenge? Let us know in the comments, and we'll catch up with you next time.